Dr. Lena Cross pressed her palm against the scanner outside the Draknari breeding station, knowing this moment could end her career or change everything. The security system beeped 3 times, each tone higher than the last, as if questioning whether a human truly had clearance to enter the most sacred space in Draknari culture. Behind the reinforced glass doors, she could see the faint glow of heat lamps and hear the soft scraping of claws on stone. Winglead Sarath materialized from the shadows, his massive form blocking the entrance completely. His bronze scales caught the overhead lights, each one the size of Lena's hand, sharp enough to cut through steel. His eyes, ancient and unforgiving, fixed on her with an intensity that made her instincts scream to run. "You should not be here," his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "No outsider enters the creche, ever." Lena kept her hands visible, her posture non-threatening. She had studied Draknari body language for 2 decades, knew that any sudden movement would be interpreted as aggression. "I have authorization from the Interspecies Medical Council. Check the credentials again." Sarath's tail lashed once, a sign of deep agitation. "I care nothing for council papers. These are our young, our future. Humans have no place among them." "Then why are your hatchlings failing to thrive?" Lena spoke quietly, but the words landed like stones. "Why are bonding rates down 40% this generation? Why are parents reporting that their young won't eat, won't engage, won't respond to traditional nurturing?" The dragon's eyes narrowed to slits. "You know nothing of our struggles." "I know about sensory deprivation." Lena pulled a data tablet from her satchel, moving slowly, showing him graphs and neural scans. "Your people built these breeding stations to be safe, sterile, protected, but you accidentally created environments that starve developing minds. The hatchlings need more than warmth and food. They need stimulation, variety, texture." Sarath studied the data for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its edge. "You claim you can help them. I brought something, just let me try. 5 minutes. If it doesn't work, I'll leave and never return." The dragon stood motionless, a statue of scales and muscle. Then, with a sound like grinding stone, he stepped aside. 5 minutes. If you cause harm, human, there will be no authority in this galaxy that can protect you." The doors opened with a hiss of pressurized air. Lena stepped into the nursery, and her heart immediately broke. 12 hatchlings occupied the vast chamber, but they might as well have been ghosts. They huddled in corners, their scales dull and lifeless, lacking the vibrant sheen healthy young dragons should possess. None of them played, none of them explored. A few lay completely still, only the slight rise and fall of their breathing confirming they lived. The temperature in the room was precisely calibrated. The lighting was scientifically optimized. The feeding stations were clean and well-stocked. Everything was perfect, sterile, controlled, and it was killing them by inches. Lena knelt on the smooth stone floor, aware of 6 adult Draknari watching her every move from the observation platform above. She opened her travel case slowly, the clasps clicking in the heavy silence. Sarath's voice boomed from behind her. "What are those objects?" Lena lifted out a soft fabric rabbit, its long ears floppy and textured. Next came a music box with a gentle wind-up mechanism, then textured blankets woven from different materials, and finally small crystal prisms designed to catch and scatter light. The watching dragons muttered among themselves, confusion evident in their rumbling voices. "These are toys," Lena explained, setting them on the floor. "Comfort items, things human children use to learn about the world through touch, sound, and sight." "Frivolous objects," Sarath's tone carried disgust. "Draknari young need strength, not softness." "They need development," Lena countered. "Their brains are growing, forming connections. Without varied sensory input, those connections don't form properly. It's not about weakness, it's about healthy growth." She held out the fabric rabbit, extending it toward the nearest hatchling, a small bronze-scaled female who watched with wary eyes. "Please," Lena whispered, "just try it." The hatchling, no larger than a medium-sized dog, tilted her head. Her nostrils flared, testing the air for danger. Then, with painful slowness, she crept forward. Her movements were hesitant, as if she had forgotten how to be curious. Lena remained perfectly still as the young dragon approached. The hatchling extended her snout, touching the soft fabric with the tip of her nose. Her eyes widened. She pressed closer, rubbing her scaled cheek against the rabbit's body. And then, for the first time in weeks according to the medical reports, she made a sound. It was a purr, deep and resonant, vibrating through her entire small frame. The hatchling took the rabbit gently in her mouth, carried it to a corner, and curled around it, her tail wrapping protectively around the soft toy. Her scales began to brighten, color returning as her body relaxed completely. Every dragon in the observation chamber fell silent. Lena reached for the next item, her hands shaking slightly with hope. 11 more hatchlings needed help, and she had exactly 4 minutes left to prove that sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when to accept gentleness. The future of two species hung in the balance, wrapped in soft fabric and simple kindness. The small bronze hatchling's purr echoed through the nursery like a forgotten song, and suddenly every young dragon in the chamber lifted their heads. Lena watched as 11 pairs of eyes focused on their sister, who lay contentedly wrapped around the soft fabric rabbit, her scales now gleaming with renewed vitality. Some of the hatchlings stood, their movements uncertain but curious. Lena moved slowly, drawing a music box from her case. The wooden surface was smooth and warm, carved with simple patterns that caught the light. She wound the key carefully, then set it on the floor between herself and a cluster of 3 hatchlings who had ventured closer together. The melody began, soft and tinkling, notes tumbling over each other like water over stones. But more importantly, the box vibrated gently with each chime. A green-scaled hatchling, larger than the others, but still small enough to fit in Lena's arms, crept forward. He sniffed the box once, then pressed his chest against it. His eyes closed. His whole body seemed to melt into the floor as the vibrations traveled through his scales and into his core. A rumbling sound emerged from deep in his throat, not quite a purr but close, a sound of pure physical relief. Within seconds, 2 more hatchlings crowded around the music box, pressing against it and against each other, seeking both the vibration and the contact. From the observation platform, one of the adult dragons made a choked sound. Lena recognized it as Scalemother Thurin, whose own hatchling was among the 12 struggling young. The older dragon's claws scraped against the metal railing, her usual composure cracking. Sareth's voice was quieter now, uncertain. What is happening to them? Lena pulled out the textured blankets, spreading them across the floor. They're experiencing sensory input their bodies are craving. Touch is fundamental to neural development in most species. Draknari scales are incredibly sensitive, far more than human skin. They're designed to feel temperature changes, air currents, even emotional vibrations from other dragons. But in this sterile environment, they're being starved of varied sensation. A pair of hatchlings discovered the blankets, their claws catching in the woven fabric. One was silver-scaled, the other deep red. They began to wrestle playfully, rolling across the soft surface, their movements becoming more energetic by the second. The red hatchling grabbed the blanket's edge in her teeth and pulled, making the fabric bunch up. The silver hatchling pounced on the resulting lump, and both tumbled over in a tangle of wings and tails. They were playing, actually playing. Lena blinked back tears as she reached for the prisms. These were simple crystal shapes, precisely cut to scatter light into rainbows when positioned correctly. She set them on the floor near the heat lamps, and immediately the walls exploded with color. Red, blue, green, violet. The rainbow patches danced across the stone surfaces, shifting and moving with the slightest air current. A tiny gray hatchling, who had not moved from her corner since Lena arrived, suddenly chirped. It was a sharp, excited sound. She leaped to her feet and pounced on a red spot of light. Her claws clicked against the floor as the light slipped away from her, and she pounced again, her wings flaring for balance. Within moments, 5 hatchlings were chasing light spots around the nursery, leaping and tumbling over each other, filling the space with chirps and growls and the sound of claws on stone. The transformation was so complete, so immediate, that Lena had to sit back on her heels to process it. This cannot be real, Thurin's voice shook. The Scale Mother descended from the observation platform, moving faster than Lena had ever seen a Draknari move. She entered the nursery and stood frozen, watching her own hatchling, a black-scaled female, wrestling with two others over the fabric rabbit. My daughter has not played in 6 weeks. She would not eat, would not respond when I called. We thought we were losing her. The black hatchling looked up at her mother's voice, still holding the rabbit's ear in her mouth. Her tail wagged. It was such a simple, joyful gesture that Thurin made a sound like a sob. Lena stood slowly, aware that 5 minutes had long passed. In human development, we learned centuries ago that children need more than food and safety. They need stimulation, play, variety. Softness matters just as much as strength, especially for the young. Sarath entered the nursery now, his massive form moving carefully around the playing hatchlings. He watched the green-scaled hatchling, still pressed against the humming music box, his expression unreadable. We are Draknari. We have raised young for thousands of generations. We value discipline, austerity, strength through hardship. And it's killing them. Lena gestured at the transformed nursery. Look at them, really look. They're not weak because they're playing. They're becoming strong because they're finally getting what they need to grow properly. A white-scaled hatchling approached Sarath, dragging a blanket twice her size. She dropped it at his feet and chirped expectantly, her tail swishing. The wing lead stared down at her, and something in his ancient eyes softened. He reached down with one enormous claw and gently tugged the blanket. The hatchling pounced on it immediately, growling in mock ferocity, attacking the fabric with all the intensity her small body could muster. Sarath tugged again, and she tumbled over, then scrambled up and attacked with renewed determination. The dragon who had threatened Lena with death less than an hour ago was playing with a hatchling, and despite everything he believed about strength and tradition, he was smiling. Thurin approached Lena, her movements slow and deliberate. Why would a human care about Draknari young? What do you gain from this? Lena met the dragon's eyes. They're children. All children deserve to be happy. That's reason enough. News traveled fast through the Draknari communication networks. Within hours of Lena's visit to the breeding station, images of playing hatchlings spread across the fleet like wildfire. Parents who had watched their own young grow listless saw the transformation, saw hatchlings chasing light and wrestling with fabric, saw genuine joy returning to empty eyes. The response was immediate and divided. Elder Counselor Dramek stood before the assembled High Council, his crimson scales bristling with fury. He was ancient even by Draknari standards, his voice heavy with tradition. The holographic display behind him showed footage from the nursery, hatchlings tangled in blankets and pressing against music boxes. This is an outrage. His words echoed through the council chamber, a massive space carved from a single asteroid. Humans have violated our sacred customs, interfered with how we raise our young. These objects, he gestured at the images with disgust, these toys insult everything we are. Murmurs of agreement rippled through some council members. Patrol Captain Enhira leaned forward. What do you propose, Elder? Remove the items and return the hatchlings to their previous state. Exactly that, Dramek's tail lashed. We are Draknari. Our strength comes from hardship, from learning to endure. These human trinkets teach our young nothing but softness. Winglead Sarath rose from his seat, and the chamber fell silent. He had not planned to speak, had spent the hours since Lena's departure wrestling with his own confusion, but he could not stay quiet. I was there. I watched hatchlings who had not eaten in days begin feeding normally within an hour of receiving these items. I saw young ones who could not bond with their parents suddenly responsive and engaged. You were deceived by human manipulation, Dramek countered. This is how they operate, with kind faces and false solutions, weakening us from within. Scale Mother Thurin stood, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was one of the oldest mothers in the fleet, her wisdom sought by parents across dozens of colony worlds. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of deep pain. My daughter stopped eating 11 days ago. She would not respond when I sang to her, would not curl against me for warmth. I thought I was watching her die slowly. Today she played, she ate. She looked at me and chirped with happiness. You call that manipulation? I call it a miracle. The chamber erupted in competing voices. Some called for Lena's arrest. Others demanded access to the same items for their own struggling hatchlings. Councillor Dramic raised his voice above the chaos. We cannot allow humans to dictate how we raise Draknari young. No one is dictating anything. Enhira's calm voice cut through the noise. She offered help. She showed us something we missed. The question is whether our pride matters more than our children's health. Sarath activated his display, projecting medical scans. These are readings from the 12 hatchlings before and after the human's intervention. Increased brain activity, improved stress levels, better digestion. This is medical data, not opinion. An older council member, Battle Leader Renth, spoke for the first time. I remember the old stories before we built the breeding stations. Hatchlings raised in nature, surrounded by forest sounds, water, varied textures. Those generations produced our greatest leaders. When did we decide sterile safety was better than rich experience? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The breeding stations had been built with the best intentions, designed to protect hatchlings from predators and environmental dangers. No one had considered that safety might come at a cost. Dramic's scales flared. You would have us return to primitive conditions, expose our young to unnecessary risks. I would have us remember that development requires more than protection. Renth looked around the chamber. This human did not create new knowledge. She reminded us of something our ancestors understood. Young minds need variety to grow strong. Thurin pulled up her own data, images from breeding stations across the fleet. Look at the patterns. Stations in older facilities with more varied environments show higher bonding rates. Newer stations, built to maximum sterile standards, show the worst developmental outcomes. The correlation is clear. We created this problem ourselves. Then we should fix it ourselves, Dramic insisted, without human interference. Why? Enhira's question was direct. Because accepting help threatens your sense of superiority. Our hatchlings are suffering. A human recognized the problem and offered a solution. What exactly do we lose by accepting it, except our arrogance? The chamber fell into tense silence. Parents throughout the fleet were watching this debate, waiting to see if pride would triumph over their children's well-being. Sarath thought of the white-scaled hatchling playing with the blanket, her eyes bright with joy. He thought of how quickly the transformation had occurred, how immediate the relief. Councillor Dramic stood rigid, his expression carved from stone. If we allow this, we admit that humans understand our young better than we do. No, Scalemother Thurin's voice was gentle but firm. We admit that sometimes an outside perspective can see what we're too close to notice. We admit that love for our children matters more than our pride. And we admit that strength includes knowing when to accept help. The vote was called. The chamber filled with the sound of claws on voting pads, each councillor making their choice. When the results appeared on the main display, the decision was narrow but clear. Lena's enrichment program would be allowed to continue. More than that, it would be expanded to every breeding station in Draknari space. Elder Councillor Dramic left the chamber without a word, his tail rigid with displeasure, but in nurseries across the fleet. Parents began requesting the simple items that had transformed 12 struggling hatchlings into playing, thriving young dragons. The future had shifted, built on fabric and music and scattered light. 3 weeks after the council's decision, Lena stood in a Draknari workshop on Colony 7, surrounded by tools she barely recognized. The space smelled of heated metal and something sweet like rain on stone. Around her, 12 Draknari artisans worked with focused intensity, their claws manipulating materials with precision that would make human craftsmen weep with envy. Wing Lead Sarath approached, carrying something wrapped in silver cloth. The first batch is complete. We used your designs as templates, but adapted them to our traditions and materials. He unwrapped the bundle to reveal objects that took Lena's breath away. A musical instrument carved from resonant stone, etched with ancestral patterns. When struck, it produced both sound and vibration, the notes pure and haunting. A blanket woven from heat-resistant fibers, its texture shifting from smooth to rough in patterns that stimulated developing scales. Crystalline shapes that caught light and fractured it into colors matching traditional Draknari ceremonial displays. "These are beautiful," Lena whispered, running her fingers along the carved stone. "They're not copies of human toys. They're something entirely yours." That was the point. Scale-Mother Thurin joined them, her claws holding a soft sculpture shaped like a miniature dragon, crafted from materials that gave slightly when pressed. "We took the concept you introduced and made it Draknari. Our young will learn through play, but they will learn our history, our art, our culture." An artisan named Brex held up a puzzle made from interlocking mineral pieces. "This teaches problem-solving and motor control, but the pattern, when complete, shows the Great Migration, when our ancestors first left the home world. Every toy carries a lesson." Lena watched as they demonstrated each creation, explaining the thought behind every design. These were not frivolous objects. They were teaching tools wrapped in beauty, ways to stimulate young minds while passing down cultural knowledge. The Draknari had taken her simple concept and elevated it into something profound. "How are the hatchlings responding?" Lena asked. Thurin's expression softened in a way Lena had learned meant deep emotion. "The change is remarkable. Bonding rates are up 60% across all stations that implemented the program. Hatchlings are meeting developmental milestones earlier than previous generations, but more than that, they seem happier, more curious, more engaged with the world around them." Sarath pulled up a holographic display showing data from dozens of breeding stations. Growth charts, neurological scans, behavioral assessments, every metric pointed in the same direction. The enrichment program was working beyond anyone's expectations. "There is still resistance," he admitted. "Elder Counselor Dramek refuses to allow the program in stations under his direct authority. He calls it cultural corruption." "How many stations is that?" Lena asked. "4, with approximately 200 hatchlings total." Sarath's tail lashed with frustration. "Parents in those stations are petitioning for access to enrichment items, but Dramek blocks every request. He believes he is protecting traditional values." Lena bit her lip, anger and sadness warring in her chest. 200 hatchlings still suffering because one leader valued pride over well-being. Can the council override him? "Technically, yes, but it would create a political crisis." Thurin sighed. "Dramek has support among the older traditionalists. Forcing the issue could split the council." "So politics matter more than children." Lena tried to keep the bitterness from her voice and failed. "For some, yes." Patrol Captain Enhira entered the workshop, her scales gleaming under the bright work lights. "But not for everyone. I brought you something." She activated her data pad, showing Lena a video feed. It showed a breeding station Lena didn't recognize, the walls marked with Dramek's family crest. But inside the nursery, hatchlings played with handmade toys. Fabric creatures, musical stones, textured climbing structures. How Lena stared at the screen. Dramek banned the program. Parents smuggled items in. Enhira smiled, a terrifying expression on a dragon, but one Lena had learned to recognize as genuine happiness. They made toys themselves, following patterns shared through unofficial channels. Some of the station staff are helping them, turning a blind eye to the violations. Dramek's own protocols are being undermined by people who love their young more than they fear his authority. Sarath watched the video with visible satisfaction. "The guard captain at that station is my cousin. She sent me a message last week. She said if Dramek wants to confiscate toys from hatchlings, he can come do it himself and face the parents." "Has he tried?" Lena asked. "He sent orders. The station staff claimed the items were traditional Draknari objects, not part of the human program. Technically true, since our artisans made them." Thurin's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Dramek knows what is happening, but he cannot prove it violates his directives without admitting that Draknari-made toys are the same as human-inspired ones." Lena laughed, the sound bright in the workshop. "You're using bureaucracy against him." "We learned from the best." Enhira gestured at Lena. "Humans are masters of finding loopholes in authority. We are merely applying those lessons. Brex approached with the completed set of enrichment items, now numbering in the hundreds. These will go to stations across the fleet. We have orders for thousands more. Every artisan collective wants to contribute. This has become a point of cultural pride, creating the finest developmental tools in the galaxy. Lena looked at the assembled toys, each one a work of art, each one designed with love and purpose. The human concept had been absorbed into Draknari culture so completely that it was no longer foreign. It was theirs now, transformed and improved. "What about Draymuk?" she asked quietly. Sarath's expression grew serious. "Time will tell, but every day more hatchlings in his stations receive smuggled toys. Every day more parents see the difference. Eventually, even he will have to acknowledge the truth. The truth that all children deserved joy. The truth that strength and gentleness were not opposites. The truth that sometimes the best gift was simply caring enough to help." The summons arrived on a cold morning, delivered by a council messenger. Lena read the formal language 3 times, her hands trembling. She was to appear before the full High Council to explain and defend her intervention in Draknari child-rearing practices. The hearing would take place in 2 days. Sarath found her in the research lab, staring at data screens. "You received it." "They're going to put me on trial." Lena's voice was flat. Draymuk finally found enough support to challenge the program officially. "Not a trial, a formal inquiry." Sarath settled onto the reinforced floor. "There is a difference. What happens if they rule against me? The program could be terminated. You could be barred from Draknari space." He paused, "But that assumes you will lose." Lena turned to face him. "Will I?" "That depends on what you say and what evidence we present." Sarath pulled up files on his display. "Thurin and I have been gathering data, testimonials from parents, medical documentation showing improved outcomes, economic analyses showing healthier hatchlings require less medical intervention." "Facts and numbers." Lena shook her head. "Draymuk doesn't care about those." "Then we must make him care about his legacy." Patrol Captain Enhira entered, followed by Battle Leader Renth. The old warrior moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp. Renth spoke in his gravelly voice. "I have watched Draknari leadership for 3 centuries. I have seen leaders remembered as heroes and others forgotten as fools. Draymuk faces a choice about which he will be. He thinks opposing the program makes him a defender of tradition," Enhira added. "We need to show him it makes him an obstacle to his people's future." Over the next 2 days, they prepared. Lena reviewed every piece of data, every testimonial, every scan. But beneath the preparation lay a cold knot of fear. She was one human, about to face the most powerful governing body of a species that could crush her without effort. The council chamber was massive. Lena stood in the center of a circular floor, surrounded by towering dragons seated in tiered galleries. The space was designed to make the person at center feel small and vulnerable. It was working. Elder Councillor Draymuk presided from the highest seat, his crimson scales gleaming under the chamber lights. "Dr. Lena Cross, you stand before this council to answer for your unauthorized interference in Draknari child development practices. How do you respond to these charges?" Lena took a breath, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I respond that there are no charges to answer. I offered help. The council voted to accept it. Everything I have done has been with official approval and cooperation." "You manipulated our emotions," Draymuk countered. "You showed us suffering hatchlings and presented yourself as a savior, knowing we would be too concerned for our young to think clearly. I showed you a problem and offered a solution. If recognizing that problem caused emotional responses, perhaps those emotions were trying to tell you something important." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Speaking so directly to an elder councillor bordered on disrespect, but Lena was past caring about protocol. These dragons held her fate in their claws. The least they could do was hear the truth. Draymuk's scales flared. "You presume to lecture us about our own young." "No, I presume to share knowledge about child development that applies across species." Lena activated her data display, projecting images onto the chamber's central screen. These are comparative neurological scans. Human children, Draknari hatchlings, and 6 other species, all showing the same pattern. Developing brains need varied sensory input to form healthy neural pathways. This is not opinion. This is biology. She showed them the data, walking through each point methodically. Growth rates, bonding success, cognitive development markers. Every metric showed improvement in hatchlings exposed to enrichment programs. You claim this justifies cultural interference, Dramek said, that biology overrides tradition. I claim that tradition should serve life, not the other way around. Lena met his eyes. Your ancestors raised hatchlings in rich natural environments. They understood instinctively what we now measure scientifically. The sterile breeding stations were built with good intentions, but they accidentally removed something essential. I did not introduce a foreign concept. I helped you remember what your own culture once knew. Battle Leader Renth stood from his seat. The human speaks truth. I was raised before the stations existed. We played in forests, rivers, caves. We learned through exploration and discovery. The breeding stations made us safer, but perhaps less alive. This program does not make us more human. It makes us more Draknari. Scale-Mother Thurin rose as well. My daughter nearly died from failure to thrive. Today she is healthy, curious, thriving. Every parent in this chamber has access to the same data I do. We can see the results. The question is whether we will acknowledge them or let pride blind us to our children's needs. One by one, council members began to stand. Some spoke of their own hatchlings, transformed by simple toys and enriched environments. Others presented data from their regions, showing improved outcomes across every measure. The chamber filled with voices, most supporting the program, some still uncertain, a few standing firm with Dramek. The elder counselor listened to it all, his expression carved from stone. When the chamber finally fell silent, he spoke. You ask us to choose between tradition and our young. That is a false choice designed to make oppositions seem cruel. No, Lena's voice rang clear. I ask you to choose between rigid thinking and adaptive wisdom, between pride and love, between being remembered as the leader who clung to mistakes or the one who had the courage to change. That choice is yours alone. The chamber held its breath, waiting for Dramek's response. The future balanced on the edge of his decision. 6 months had passed since the council hearing. Lena stood outside the nursery on Colony 7, the same door she had approached with such uncertainty. Today felt different. Today was a celebration. The corridor was decorated with traditional Draknari ceremonial banners, their colors vibrant against the gray walls. Adult dragons filled the observation areas, their scales gleaming with pride. Through the glass, Lena could see the 12 original hatchlings, no longer tiny and listless, but healthy juveniles, their bodies strong and movements confident. Wing lead Sarath approached. They have been practicing for 3 days. Rilla insisted on perfection. Lena smiled at the mention of the bronze hatchling who had first accepted the fabric rabbit. She always was determined. More than determined, she leads the others now. The nursery doors opened, and the 12 juveniles filed out in formation. They had grown so much, their wings now capable of true flight, their scales brilliant with health. They formed a circle around Lena. Rilla stepped forward, her bronze scales catching the light. In her claws she held the original fabric rabbit, worn from months of love but still intact. She bowed her head low, the highest sign of respect in Draknari culture, and placed the rabbit at Lena's feet. Then she began to sing. The sound was unlike anything Lena had heard, a harmony of clicks and resonant tones that vibrated through her bones. The other juveniles joined in, their voices weaving together in complex patterns. It was a flight song, one of the ancient ceremonial pieces reserved for honoring heroes. They were singing it for her. The juveniles launched into the air, their wings beating in rhythm with their song. They spiraled upward, performing aerial maneuvers that demonstrated skill and joy. They dove and spun, their bodies painting patterns in the air, each movement telling a story. The story of darkness and light, of struggling and healing, of a human who cared and a species that learned to accept help. Tears streamed down Lena's face. These were the same hatchlings who could barely lift their heads 6 months ago. Now they soared with confidence and grace. When the flight dance ended, the juveniles landed in a perfect circle around Lena. Rilla approached again, chirping softly. She pressed her scaled head against Lena's hand, a gesture of deep affection. Scale-Mother Thurin emerged from the crowd, carrying a small box made of polished stone. Dr. Cross, on behalf of all Draknari parents, we have something for you. She opened the box to reveal an honor scale, a single scale preserved in crystal. The scale was Thurin's own, recognizing the distinctive midnight blue coloration. Such a gift was reserved for those who had saved lives. You gave our children their future, Thurin said quietly. This is inadequate thanks, but it carries our eternal gratitude. Lena accepted the honor scale with shaking hands. I only showed you what was possible. You did the hard work. You changed your entire approach to child-rearing. You chose your children over your pride. Not all of us chose quickly. Elder Counselor Dramek stepped forward, and the gathered dragons fell silent. The old dragon looked different, his posture less rigid. I owe you an apology, Dr. Cross. I fought against this program because I feared it made us weak. I was wrong. He gestured, and a young dragon stepped forward. This is my great-grandchild. She was failing to thrive in my station. I nearly killed her through my stubbornness. When her parents smuggled enrichment items into the nursery, she transformed within days. I could no longer deny the truth. The small hatchling was playing with a carved stone puzzle, her movements energetic and curious. Dramek watched her with obvious love. You were right. Strength includes knowing when to change. I formally withdraw all opposition and offer my full support. The gathered dragons erupted in approving rumbles. Patrol Captain Enhira grinned at Lena. That might be the first time in history that Dramek admitted he was wrong. Battle Leader Renth chuckled. Mark this day, it will be remembered. Sarath approached Lena, his massive form somehow gentle. The program has now been implemented in every breeding station across Draknari space. Bonding rates are at historic highs. Developmental outcomes exceed our best previous generations, but more than that, we see something we did not expect. What's that? Lena asked. Joy, pure, simple joy in our young. We had forgotten that childhood should include happiness. You reminded us. Lena looked at the 12 juveniles, now playing together with easy affection, chasing each other through the air and tumbling over enrichment toys that had been crafted with love by Draknari artisans. She thought about the journey from that first terrifying moment at the nursery door to this celebration of life and change. I didn't do this alone, she said softly. Every parent who chose to try something new. Every artisan who crafted toys with cultural meaning. Every leader who put children before tradition. They made this happen. Rilla chirped and nuzzled against Lena's side. The bronze juvenile had kept the fabric rabbit close for 6 months, sleeping with it, playing with it, treating it as precious. Now she picked it up gently and offered it back to Lena. But Lena shook her head. No, little one, that's yours. A reminder that love crosses all boundaries, that kindness needs no translation, and that every child, no matter their species, deserves to grow up surrounded by joy. Rilla clutched the rabbit close and purred, the sound of pure contentment. Around them, dragons and humans stood together, watching young ones play and thrive. The future stretched ahead, bright with possibility, built on the simple truth that caring for children was never a sign of weakness. It was the greatest strength any species could possess.